Every map tells a story of power. And in the Middle East, geography decides who can make peace and who can't. For decades, diplomacy has tried to redraw what rivers, deserts, and faith already defined. Now, a new plan challenges that map once again. This time, led by an American president who says peace can be engineered. Stay with us as we trace how borders, history, and power converge, and discover whether peace can truly be built upon geography itself. A moment that redefines the Middle East. For more than 70 years, the Middle East has been the stage of promises and betrayals, of peace signed in daylight and broken by nightfall. From Camp David to Oslo, from war to ceasefire, every generation believed it might be the last to live under the shadow of conflict. Yet, the map never stopped bleeding. But now, a new page seems to be turning. An American president, once again, steps into the heart of the region, claiming he can do what history never could, end one of the longest conflicts on Earth. To his supporters, it's bold diplomacy reborn. To his critics, it's a gamble with fire. Either way, this moment could redefine the Middle East, not through war but through an experiment in peace no one truly believes will last. The arrival. Trump lands in the Holy Land. When Air Force One touched down at Ben Gurion Airport, the world held its breath. It wasn't just another diplomatic visit, it was the return of an American president to a region that has known more wars than peace. Cameras flashed as Donald Trump stepped onto Israeli soil, greeted by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a crowd of dignitaries waving flags of both nations. But beyond the ceremony, expectations were sky high, and skepticism even higher. The next morning, Trump made history by addressing the Knesset, Israel's parliament. His speech was bold, unfiltered, and loaded with symbolism. For peace to last, he declared, Israel's security must be eternal, and peace must be built, not demanded. The chamber erupted in applause, some genuine, some diplomatic. Outside, protesters gathered, warning that this so-called peace plan could be another illusion written in sand. Still, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. An American president standing in Jerusalem, speaking of peace through strength, and inviting the Arab world to the table not as adversaries, but as partners. Within 24 hours, Trump's motorcade was crossing the Sinai toward Egypt, where an unprecedented gathering of 20 Arab leaders was about to take place. The summit would become the most ambitious diplomatic event in the Middle East since Oslo, a meeting not of enemies, but of exhausted survivors of endless wars. And there, in the coastal resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, the stage was set for what the world would soon call the new peace gamble. The Sharm el-Sheikh Summit. 20 Arab leaders and one vision. It's been more than 30 years since that iconic handshake on the White House lawn, a moment that made the world believe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict could finally end. But the dream of Oslo slowly faded. Violence returned. Leaders fell. Hope turned into bitterness. Each new generation grew up knowing that peace was possible, but never achieved. From Oslo to today, the Middle East has watched peace deals come and go like mirages in the desert. And yet, here we are again. In October 2025, a new summit was called on the edge of the Red Sea. 20 leaders from across the Arab world gathered under the same roof, some for the first time in decades, to sign a document many called the most ambitious peace agreement since Oslo. At the center of it all, Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Egypt's President Sisi, surrounded by a coalition of Arab states once unthinkable as partners. They agreed on 3 pillars: security first, reconstruction second, and governance through international supervision. No one called it a miracle. Everyone knew it was a gamble, a high-stakes experiment in trust after a century of betrayal. But for a brief moment, hope returned to the Red Sea. As leaders who had once fought each other sat side by side, signing not a promise of friendship, but a truce between realities. The 20-point peace plan, anatomy of a gamble. The document signed in Sharm el-Sheikh wasn't a treaty in the traditional sense. It was a blueprint, a 20-point roadmap designed to rebuild Gaza, redefine Israel's borders of engagement, and test whether coexistence could survive 5 years of scrutiny. They called it the Gaza Peace Framework, but everyone knew it was something bigger, a trial run for a new Middle East. The first phase demanded the impossible: a complete ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and the arrival of an international stabilization force, a Middle East NATO of sorts, combining American command with Arab and European support. In theory, this would create a buffer between Israel and Hamas, while aid poured into the Strip. In practice, every checkpoint and every weapon handed over was a moment of doubt. Phase 2 introduced a new idea: a transitional authority. Not Hamas, not the Palestinian Authority, but a technocratic council supervised by international observers. Its mission: restore civil life, rebuild institutions, and prepare Gaza for a future self-government still undefined. Phase 3 focused on reconstruction. Billions in Arab and Western investment. Hospitals, ports, schools. A visible peace to convince the streets before convincing the politicians. And only then, in Phase 4, would the world revisit the hardest question: statehood. What form, for whom, and under whose security umbrella? Critics called the plan an illusion built on sequencing, that peace cannot survive without political identity. Supporters argued it was the only way forward: earn sovereignty by proving stability. 20 points, 5 years, countless variables. A framework both fragile and daring, like the glass on which it was signed. Hamas delivers, partially. The first test of peace came sooner than anyone expected. According to the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, Hamas had 7 days to fulfill its initial obligations: declare a ceasefire, free the hostages, and allow humanitarian aid to flow. On the 6th day, a convoy of white buses crossed the Rafah gate. 20 hostages, frightened, pale, alive, stepped into the light. Among them, a child, 2 doctors, and a foreign aid worker who had spent nearly a year in captivity. For a moment, the world believed the plan was working. The first phase of Trump's peace deal was complete. The White House celebrated. The UN called it a humanitarian breakthrough. And even in Jerusalem, Netanyahu admitted, a small step worth taking. But the joy didn't last. Hamas delivered the living, but not the dead. The bodies of more than a dozen Israelis were withheld, their fates used as bargaining chips for future phases of negotiation. And in the same streets where celebrations had erupted hours before, another spectacle unfolded: public executions of Palestinians accused of collaborating with Israel. Crowds filmed them on phones. The videos spread within minutes. Peace had barely begun, and already the moral battle for its soul was visible to the world. Was this justice, or revenge disguised as order? Could any agreement built on fear ever stand on trust? The international force condemned the killings. Washington called them a violation of the spirit of peace. But the damage was done. In Gaza, the line between discipline and vengeance had blurred once again. The first phase was technically complete, but morally fractured. And for many, it was a reminder that signing peace on paper is easy. Living it in the streets of Gaza is something else entirely. Israel's dilemma: peace with firewalls. Across Israel, the images of freed hostages brought tears and questions. For every family reunited, another wondered how long the calm would last. On the airwaves, talk show hosts called it a miracle of strategy. Opposition voices called it a trap painted white. And in Jerusalem, Benjamin Netanyahu walked a tightrope he himself had built. His coalition had been forged on one iron promise: no Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. A pledge repeated so often it had become doctrine, the firewall protecting Israel's sense of security. But Trump's 20-point plan blurred that line. It spoke of reconstruction, governance, and, eventually, a political resolution. For many Israelis, that phrase echoed the ghosts of Oslo. Generals warned that a fully sovereign Palestinian state under current conditions could place rockets within minutes of Tel Aviv. Security chiefs argued that only a layered system, border control, intelligence, and regional coordination could make any peace sustainable. So Israel accepted the plan, not as faith, but as calculus. Its role would be guarded cooperation, participating in reconstruction while keeping one hand on the trigger. Peace must not come at the price of Israel's survival. We will test this process, but we will not gamble our security. Those words reassured his coalition and quietly alarmed Washington. How do you build trust when your partner calls it a test? For Israel, peace was never about hope alone. It was about control, walls, intelligence, and deterrence. Now, for the first time, those same walls were being asked to protect not from war, but from peace itself. The Arab investment wave. Billions for stability. The war may have ended with words, but the battle for peace began with money. Within days of the summit, a coalition of Arab nations, led by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, announced the largest reconstruction fund in the region's history. More than $80 billion committed to rebuilding Gaza and stabilizing its borders. The plan promised new ports, hospitals, solar grids, and housing, a vision of transformation that could turn ruins into cities and enemies into investors. For Saudi Arabia, it was about prestige, proving that the Arab world could fund its own peace. For Qatar, it was influence, a seat at every negotiation table from Gaza to Washington. And for the West, it was a rare win, Arab capital replacing Western soldiers. The Gulf monarchies called it peace by prosperity. But analysts saw something deeper, a quiet race for control. Wherever money flows in the Middle East, strategy follows. Saudi Arabia sought to anchor its Vision 2030 influence, tying Gaza's recovery to regional trade through the Red Sea. Qatar envisioned a corridor of soft power stretching from its Al Udeid airbase to the reconstruction offices in Rafah. And amid it all, the United States watched carefully, seeing in this wave of investment a chance to bind the region to its orbit through economics rather than troops. Money can rebuild walls, but it cannot rebuild trust. And for every billion pledged, questions lingered. Who will oversee the contracts? Who will secure the sites? And who will ensure the peace doesn't vanish once the funds are spent? Still, in a land where every sunrise once brought smoke, for the first time in years, cranes were rising higher than rockets. Between hope and history. Every generation in this land has lived between hope and history, between dreams of peace and the memory of war. From the handshake of Oslo to the signatures of Sharm el-Sheikh, the same question keeps echoing across the decades. Can peace survive where politics never has? History rarely repeats itself, but in the Middle East, it rhymes with painful precision. The 20-point plan now signed may not end a century of blood, but perhaps for the first time in years, it gives the region something rarer than victory, a process. Peace will not come from speeches or treaties, but from roofs rebuilt, borders that stay quiet, and children who grow up without learning the sound of sirens before their first word. And yet, for all its ambition, this plan remains a fragile experiment, a test of whether humanity can learn from its own history before repeating it once more. For now, the Middle East stands at a crossroads. On one path, the familiar noise of vengeance. On the other, the quiet, uncertain sound of peace taking its first breath. The choice, as always, belongs not to leaders, but to time, and to those willing to believe that this time, history might just stay still. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Leave your reflections below, subscribe to the Geography channel for more geopolitical explorations, and share this video to expand the discussion. See you next time in our ongoing journey through history, power, and place.